I always thought my marriage to Amanda was solid. We met during our sophomore year in college, where she was the outgoing journalism major who always seemed to have the answer to every professor's question, and I was the quieter engineering student who admired her from afar. When we finally clicked at a campus coffee shop, it was like gravity itself shifted. Amanda was sharp, funny, and had this magnetic energy that made you want to be around her. From then on, it was us against the world. We moved in together a year after graduation, married soon after, and built a life that I thought was unshakable. Amanda had always been ambitious, chasing one professional goal after another. She landed a job at a big PR firm downtown, the kind that came with long hours and fancy dinners with clients. I admired her drive. It was one of the things that drew me to her in the first place. My career as a software developer kept me busy too, but I always made time for our little family. When our son Ryan came along, it felt like the final piece of our puzzle. We were no longer just Amanda and Nate. We were mom and dad. But looking back, the cracks had started to form about a year ago. It wasn't a lightning bolt moment, no single event that screamed, "Something is wrong." It was more like a slow drift, like two tectonic plates silently pulling apart. Amanda began staying later at work, often blaming her new responsibilities after a promotion. "These clients are demanding," she'd say, her tone just a bit defensive, as though preempting any doubts I might have. And I didn't doubt her, not at first. Amanda was always so good at making things seem normal, so I let it go. Then there was her phone. Amanda had always been glued to her screen, part of her job, she'd say, or just catching up on social media. But something shifted. She started tilting her phone away when I walked by or holding it just a little too close to her chest when replying to a text. I noticed she'd silence her notifications at night, a habit she never had before. Once, while we were watching TV, her phone lit up on the coffee table, and I glanced at the screen out of instinct. The notification vanished too quickly for me to read it, but Amanda immediately grabbed the phone and shoved it into her pocket. "What was that about?" I asked, half joking, half curious. "Work email," she replied casually, not even looking up from the show. She'd always been quick on her feet like that, turning potential arguments into nothing. But it gnawed at me. Something about the way she avoided eye contact in that moment made my stomach twist. I told myself it was nothing. Married people don't get far without trust, right? And besides, we had Ryan to think about. He was only 8, with Amanda's dark eyes and my goofy smile, and I wanted to protect the bubble of stability we built for him. But the little things kept piling up. Amanda started suggesting that I spend more time with Ryan, just the two of us. "Take him to the arcade this weekend," she'd say, or, "Why don't you and Ryan go camping like you used to with your dad?" It sounded thoughtful on the surface, but the timing felt off. She'd always been the one to insist we do things as a family, and now, it seemed like she was pushing me out of the house. One weekend, I took her up on the suggestion and took Ryan on a day trip to the lake. When we got home that evening, Amanda wasn't there. I texted her, and she responded hours later, saying she'd been at a work dinner that ran late. She didn't come home until close to midnight, wearing the same clothes she'd left in that morning but looking more polished. Her lipstick was fresh, her hair neatly tied up in a way that wasn't there when I last saw her. "You couldn't call?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light but not entirely succeeding. Amanda sighed, brushing past me as she kicked off her heels. "It was last minute, Nate. You know how these client meetings go. Don't make this a thing." I bit my tongue and let it go, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Something wasn't adding up, but I didn't know how to confront her without sounding paranoid. The final straw, or what should have been, came one Sunday afternoon. Ryan was playing outside, and I was cleaning up in the kitchen when I noticed something on the floor near the trash can, a little foil circle. I picked it up, confused. It was a piece of packaging from birth control pills. Amanda hadn't been on birth control in years, not since I had a vasectomy after Ryan was born. I stood there, holding that tiny foil circle, my mind racing. It didn't make sense. Maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe a friend had been over and left it behind. Maybe. Everything okay in here? Amanda's voice cut through my thoughts. She was standing in the doorway, her expression calm, too calm. I shoved the foil in my pocket and nodded. Yeah, just cleaning out. She lingered for a second, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she suspected something. Then she shrugged and walked away, leaving me with a million unanswered questions. That night, as Amanda slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the past few months in my head. The late nights, the phone secrecy, the unexplained absences, and now this. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was starting to stack up. Still, I wasn't ready to face the truth. Not yet. The foil circle haunted me. It wasn't just the thing itself, but everything it represented. I couldn't stop running through the possibilities in my head. Was I overthinking this? Was it really just some innocent coincidence? The Amanda I knew wouldn't do something like that, not to me, not to Ryan. But if I was being honest with myself, the Amanda I knew had been slipping away for months. The next morning, as I packed Ryan's lunch and got him ready for school, I watched Amanda move around the kitchen, chatting with him as if nothing had changed. She seemed so normal. Maybe I really was losing my mind. Maybe I was just projecting my own insecurities or reading too much into things. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to pay closer attention, not in an obsessive way. At least that's what I told myself, but just enough to see if there was a pattern. It didn't take long to find one. That week, Amanda had 2 late meetings and a networking event that I couldn't verify. When I casually asked who she'd been meeting with, she gave vague answers. You wouldn't know them, just clients. She'd smile as she said it, but there was a tightness in her expression, like she was daring me to question her further. One night, I asked if she wanted to sit down and watch a movie together like we used to. She hesitated, glancing at her phone before forcing a smile. Rain check? I've got a headache, she said, heading to bed early. But when I passed the bedroom an hour later, the light from her phone illuminated her face as she lay there, texting someone. I stood there for a moment, unseen, watching the subtle smile spread across her lips. It wasn't the kind of smile you'd give to a coworker or a friend. It was the kind of smile I used to get from her, the kind that made me feel like the most important person in the world. Except now, it wasn't for me. The next day, while Amanda was at work and Ryan was at school, I decided to check our home computer. Amanda had her own laptop, which she rarely left unattended, but occasionally she'd forget to log out of her email on the shared desktop. Sure enough, she had. My hands shook as I clicked into her inbox. Most of it was harmless, work emails, shopping receipts, PDA updates, but then I noticed a string of messages from someone named Mark W. I didn't recognize the name, but my heart sank when I opened the first email. It was innocuous enough, a conversation about a project she was working on. But the further I scrolled, the more the tone changed. By the third email, they were exchanging inside jokes and flirty comments. By the 10th, they were planning to meet for drinks at a downtown bar I'd never heard her mention before. The most recent email, dated 2 nights ago, was the real gut punch. Last night was amazing. Mark had written, I can't stop thinking about you. When can we do it again? There was no ambiguity, no way to spin it. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My legs wobbled, and I sank into the chair, staring at the screen as my chest tightened. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the cold, calculated way she had gone about it. The lies, the secrets, the complete disregard for everything we built. I copied the emails onto a flash drive and deleted the browser history so she wouldn't know I'd seen them. My head was spinning, my thoughts racing between anger, confusion, and heartbreak. Was this a one-time thing? Was it still going on? Did she feel anything for me anymore? For the rest of the day, I walked around in a daze. I picked Ryan up from school, helped him with his homework, and cooked dinner as if nothing had changed. Amanda came home late, as usual, breezing through the door with a casual, "Hey, how was your day?" I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to ask how she could do this to me. But instead, I played along. "Good," I said, forcing a smile. "Ryan and I worked on his science project." "How was work?" She shrugged, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Exhausting. Glad it's the weekend." I watched her closely as she spoke, searching for any hint of guilt, any crack in her carefully crafted facade. But there was nothing. She seemed completely unbothered, like the affair wasn't weighing on her at all. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up late in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. My mind raced with questions. Should I confront her? Should I try to save our marriage for Ryan's sake? Or was it already too late? At some point, I realized I wasn't just angry. I was hurt. Deeply, profoundly hurt. The woman I had trusted more than anyone else in the world had lied to my face, over and over again, while I was busy working to give her and Ryan the best life possible. I thought about Ryan, about how this would affect him if the truth ever came out. He adored his mom, looked up to her in a way that made me feel like I'd hit the jackpot in the parenting department. But if he found out she'd been lying, that she'd been unfaithful, it would crush him. I couldn't let that happen. At least, not yet. The decision to wait before confronting Amanda wasn't about sparing her feelings. It was about survival. I needed time to process, to figure out what I wanted, and more importantly, what was best for Ryan. He was my anchor in the storm, the reason I didn't let my anger and heartbreak completely consume me. But that didn't mean I was going to sit back and do nothing. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. I watched Amanda closely, paying attention to every detail, her phone habits, her sudden need for me time, the way she'd linger a little too long in the bathroom after a text notification. I hated feeling this paranoid, but every time I considered stopping, my mind went back to Mark's email. Last night was amazing. I started digging deeper. First, I checked her credit card statements. Amanda and I had a joint account, but she also had a personal one for her work expenses. Normally, I wouldn't have bothered looking, it wasn't my business, but now I had to know. A quick login revealed a string of charges to places I didn't recognize, high-end restaurants, boutique hotels, even a spa downtown. The dates matched up with her late nights. I took screenshots of everything, saving them alongside the emails on the flash drive. Every new piece of evidence felt like a punch to the gut, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't imagining things. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Amanda was cheating on me, and she was doing it with someone who made her feel comfortable enough to flaunt it right under my nose. The final nail in the coffin came one Saturday morning when Amanda told me she had to run errands. "Just groceries and a quick stop at the dry cleaner," she said, kissing me on the cheek before heading out. I waited exactly 10 minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. My heart pounded as I tailed her car through town, staying a few cars back to avoid being noticed. She didn't go to the grocery store or the dry cleaner. Instead, she drove to a small cafe on the edge of downtown. I parked across the street and watched as she got out, smoothing her hair and checking her reflection in the car window. A man was waiting for her. Even from a distance, I recognized him from his LinkedIn profile picture, which I'd found during one of my late-night searches, Mark W. He was tall, well-dressed, and at least 10 years younger than me. My stomach churned as I watched Amanda hug him, too close, too familiar, before they went inside together. I didn't follow them in. I couldn't. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold on to the steering wheel. Instead, I sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the cafe's entrance, waiting for them to come out. When they finally did, Amanda was laughing at something he said. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with anger, hurt, and 1,000 unanswerable questions. When Amanda came back a couple of hours later, she had a bag of groceries in hand, as if she'd really been at the store the whole time. "Hey," she said cheerfully, setting the bag on the counter. "I got everything we need for dinner tonight. How's Ryan?" "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. My voice sounded foreign to me, distant and hollow. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to lay everything out on the table. The emails, the credit card charges, the fact that I'd followed her that morning. But I stopped myself. The truth was, I wasn't ready. That night, after Ryan went to bed, I sat across from Amanda at the dinner table, watching her talk about her day like nothing was wrong. She was so good at this, so practiced. I wondered how long she'd been lying to me, how many times I'd missed the signs because I trusted her completely. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "So," I said casually, swirling the wine in my glass, "how was the dry cleaner?" Amanda froze for a split second, so brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it, before plastering on a smile. "Uneventful," she said. "Why?" "No reason," I said, keeping my tone light. "Just curious." Her eyes darted to mine, searching for something, accusation, suspicion, anything, but I kept my face neutral. I could see the wheels turning in her head, calculating whether she'd slipped up. She laughed nervously and changed the subject, talking about some article she'd read earlier. I played along, nodding and smiling at all the right moments, but inside, I was seething. That night, after Amanda fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I knew I couldn't keep this charade going much longer. Every moment I spent pretending felt like a betrayal of myself, and the life I thought we'd built together. But I also knew that when I finally confronted her, everything would change. There would be no going back, no undoing the damage. I didn't know if our marriage could survive this, or if I even wanted it to. What I did know was that I couldn't live like this anymore. The tension in the house was unbearable. I was walking around with the weight of what I knew, trying to pretend everything was fine, while Amanda continued to act like the perfect wife and mother. Every time I looked at her, I felt the anger bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. But Ryan was the reason I held back. I couldn't let him see the storm that was brewing. I spent the next few days obsessing over how to confront Amanda. Should I hit her with the evidence all at once or ease into it? Should I do it in private, or should I wait until Ryan was at a friend's house? Every scenario played out in my mind, each one more explosive than the last. Then one night, Amanda made the decision for me. It was a Friday, and she came home late, again. I had put Ryan to bed hours earlier, and was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. When I heard the front door open, I didn't bother looking out. "Sorry I'm late," Amanda said, her voice cheerful as she walked into the room. "Busy night?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah, you know how it is," she said, kicking off her shoes. "Back-to-back client meetings. It never ends." I turned off the TV and looked at her. "You smell like wine." She froze, her hand halfway to her hair. Yeah? We had a glass with dinner. Nothing crazy. Dinner with clients, right?" I asked, my voice sharper now. Amanda's smile faltered. "Nate, what's with the interrogation?" "It was just work." I stood up, crossing the room to stand in front of her. "Work," I repeated, my voice low. "Like the dry cleaner last weekend? Or maybe the grocery store this morning?" Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real fear flash across her face. "What are you talking about?" "You're lying to me, Amanda," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "I know about Mark. I know about the emails, the charges, the meetups. I know everything." For a moment, she just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide whether to deny it or come clean. Then, to my astonishment, she laughed, a hollow, nervous sound. "You're being ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "Mark's just a coworker. There's nothing going on." I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides. "Don't lie to me," I said through gritted teeth. "I've seen the emails, Amanda. I followed you to the cafe. I watched you with him." Her face went pale. The mask she'd been wearing for months finally cracked, and for a moment I saw the truth, the guilt, the shame, and the fear of being caught. "Nate," she started, but I cut her off. "Do not try to spin this," I snapped. I've given you every chance to come clean, every opportunity to tell me the truth, and you've lied to my face over and over again. How long has this been going on? Do you even feel guilty? Or do you think I'm such a fool that I'd never figure it out? Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. Not this time. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said, her voice trembling. You was there, and you were so busy with work, and I felt. Don't you dare blame me for this, I said, cutting her off again. I worked late so I could provide for this family. So you and Ryan could have everything you needed. And this is how you repay me? By sneaking around with some guy from work? Amanda's tears spilled over, but she didn't deny it this time. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sorry? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You're sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? To Ryan? At the mention of Ryan, Amanda broke down completely, sinking onto the couch and burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she sobbed. I was lonely, Nate. I felt invisible. And Mark, he made me feel. I don't care how he made you feel, I said coldly. You don't get to justify this. You don't get to destroy our family and act like you're the victim. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The only sound was Amanda's quiet sobs as I stood there, my mind racing. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to do anything to release the anger and pain that was tearing me apart. But I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized something that hit me like a ton of bricks. Ryan might not even be mine. The thought was like a punch to the gut, stealing the air from my lungs. I didn't say it out loud, not yet, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. I couldn't stay in the house. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving Amanda sobbing on the couch. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out. I needed to breathe. As I drove aimlessly through the night, my mind kept circling back to one question: what do I do now? The air outside was cold, but it did nothing to clear my head. I parked in an empty lot by a gas station, staring out at the fluorescent glow of the pumps as my mind replayed the confrontation. Amanda's tears, her excuses, her weak apologies, they were all burned into my memory, looping endlessly. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the question I hadn't dared to ask out loud: is Ryan mine? I hated myself for even thinking it. Ryan was my son. My boy. I was there when he was born, holding Amanda's hand as she screamed and cried, telling her how proud I was of her. I was the one who stayed up with him during his colic phase, rocking him back to sleep while Amanda passed out from exhaustion. I taught him how to ride a bike, tie his shoes, and shoot a basketball. But now, every memory, every moment we'd shared, was tainted by doubt. What if Mark, or someone else, was his father? What if this whole time, I'd been living a lie? The thought made me sick. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to keep the nausea at bay. Part of me wanted to drive back home, wake Amanda up, and demand the truth. But another part of me was terrified of what she might say. I needed proof. Cold, hard proof. The next morning, I made up an excuse to leave the house early. Amanda was still avoiding me, and Ryan, bless him, was blissfully unaware of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. I kissed him on the forehead, my heart aching as I promised I'd be back soon. I drove to a pharmacy on the other side of town, far enough away that I wouldn't risk running into anyone I knew. My hands trembled as I picked up a paternity test kit, trying to ignore the pitying glance the cashier gave me when she rang it up. Back home, I waited for the perfect moment. Ryan was outside playing basketball with the neighbors, and Amanda had gone upstairs to rest. I called Ryan inside, pretending I needed help with something in the kitchen. "Hey, bud," I said, ruffling his hair as he stood in front of me. "Can I get a quick swab of your cheek? It's for a science thing I'm working on." Ryan scrunched up his face in confusion. "Science? Like what?" "Just DNA stuff," I said quickly, trying to keep my tone light. "It's harmless. Just takes a second." He hesitated for a moment but eventually nodded. Okay, I guess. I worked as fast as I could, swabbing his cheek and sealing the sample before handing him a cookie and sending him back outside. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest the entire time, but when it was over, I felt a strange sense of calm. The hardest part was yet to come. Later that night, after Ryan went to bed, I approached Amanda in the kitchen. She was washing dishes, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was trying to avoid me. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady. She turned to face me, her expression wary. Nate, No excuses, I interrupted. I just need an answer to one question, and I need you to be honest with me. Amanda's face crumpled, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. What is it? She whispered. Is Ryan mine? Her reaction was immediate. She dropped the plate she was holding, and it shattered on the floor. Her hand flew to her mouth as she stared at me, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. Of course he is, she said, her voice trembling. How could you even ask that? Because I don't trust you anymore, I said bluntly. And because I need to know the truth. She took a step toward me, her hands outstretched, but I backed away. Please, Nate, she begged. Ryan is your son. I swear to you. Swear all you want, I said coldly. I'll know soon enough. Her face went pale as the implication sank in. What do you mean? I bought a paternity test, I said. I already have Ryan's sample. All I need now is yours. Amanda's jaw dropped. You're testing me? Are you serious? As serious as I've ever been, I said. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. This is insane, Nate. I can't believe you do this. After everything we've been through. After everything we've been through? I shot back. You mean after you cheated on me and lied to my face for months? Don't you dare act like you're the victim here. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda stared at me, her chest rising and falling with each ragged breath, but she didn't say another word. She knew there was no point in arguing. Without waiting for her response, I left the room. The test was already in the mail. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I felt like I was living in a fog, going through the motions while the weight of what I'd done hung over me. Ryan had no idea, of course. To him, everything was normal. Amanda and I had both agreed, without saying a word, that we'd keep our conflict as far from him as possible. But every time I looked at him, I couldn't stop the questions from flooding my mind. Was he really mine? Or had I been raising another man's child all this time? Amanda was different now. She'd stopped trying to explain herself or make excuses. Instead, she was quiet, almost subdued, like she was walking on eggshells around me. I caught her staring at me a few times, her expression a mixture of fear and sadness, but I couldn't bring myself to ask what she was thinking. The truth was, I didn't care. All that mattered was the result of the test. The mail came 3 days later. I hadn't told Amanda it was arriving, so when I saw the envelope with the lab's name on it, I grabbed it and headed straight to the car. I couldn't open it at home, not with her there. I drove to the park where I used to take Ryan when he was a toddler. The sight of the swings and slides brought a lump to my throat, but I shoved it down and focused on the envelope in my hands. My fingers shook as I tore it open, unfolding the letter inside. The words blurred together at first, but eventually, I found the one line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. Ryan was mine. He was mine. For a moment, I sat there in the car, letting the emotions crash over me. Relief. Joy. And then anger. Not at Ryan, of course, but at Amanda. The fact that I'd even had to question this, that she'd put me in a position where I doubted the one thing I'd always been certain of, was something I couldn't forgive. I drove home with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Amanda was in the kitchen when I walked in, chopping vegetables like it was any other day. She glanced up at me, her expression wary, and I could tell she was bracing for whatever I was about to say. "It's done," I said, holding up the now folded letter. She set down the knife, wiping her hands on a towel. "And he's mine," I said simply. Amanda let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging with relief. "I told you," she said softly. "That doesn't make this okay." I snapped, my anger flaring up again. "You don't get points for being honest after I had to force the truth out of you. You don't get to act like you've done nothing wrong." "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I stepped closer, the letter crumpling in my fist. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To our family? I doubted my own son, Amanda. I looked at him and wondered if he was even mine. Do you know how that feels?" Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stop. "You destroyed everything," I continued. "And for what? A fling? Some guy who made you feel special for 5 minutes? It wasn't like that," she said, her voice breaking. "Then what was it like?" I demanded. She didn't answer. She just stood there, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently. I stared at her for a long moment, my chest heaving with the effort of holding back everything I wanted to say. I didn't trust myself to stay calm any longer, so I turned and walked out of the room. I needed space. I spent the next few nights sleeping on the couch. Amanda didn't protest. She seemed to know I needed space, though I could feel her presence hovering just out of reach, like she was waiting for a signal that it was safe to approach. I didn't give her one. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Part of me wanted to pack a bag, grab Ryan, and leave. But another part of me, the part that had built a life with Amanda over the last 10 years, wasn't ready to let go. It was like being stuck between two versions of myself, the man I used to be, and the man I was now, after everything had fallen apart. On the 4th night, Amanda broke the silence. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the muted TV, when she walked in. She looked different, exhausted, defeated. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I didn't look at her. "What's there to talk about?" She hesitated, then sat down on the edge of the armchair across from me. "I know you're angry," she said. "And you have every right to be. But we need to figure out where we go from here. For Ryan's sake, if nothing else." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Ryan. Everything always came back to that. What do you want me to say, Amanda?" I asked, finally meeting her gaze. "That I forgive you? That we can just go back to the way things were?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I know that's not possible. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You can't fix this. You cheated on me. You lied to me. You made me question whether my own son was mine. How do you come back from that?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I love you, Nate. And I love Ryan. I want to fight for our family, even if it's broken." I leaned back, letting her words sink in. Love. That word used to mean something between us. But now, it felt hollow, like a promise that had been broken too many times to be repaired. "What about Mark?" I asked, my voice low. "Are you still in love with him?" She flinched, like I'd slapped her. "No," she said firmly. "It wasn't love. It was stupid. A mistake. I was lonely, and he made me feel wanted, but it wasn't real." I studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. But she looked sincere, her expression raw and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen in years. "And Ryan?" I asked. "Does he know anything?" "No," she said quickly. "I'd never let him find out. He loves you, Nate. You're his dad. That's all he's ever known." Her words brought a lump to my throat. Ryan didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to grow up in a house full of resentment and secrets. But could I really stay? "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can look at you every day and not see what you did. Amanda nodded slowly, her tears spilling over. I understand, she said. But please, before you make any decisions, just think about it. Think about Ryan. Think about everything we've been through. I didn't respond. Instead, I got up and left the room, leaving her sitting there in silence. That night, as I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, I thought about everything Amanda had said. She was right about one thing: whatever decision I made, it wasn't just about us. It was about Ryan too, and I had no idea what the right choice was. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy sense of clarity. My world had been flipped upside down, and no matter what I decided, life was never going to be the same. Amanda's betrayal had shattered my trust, but Ryan's innocence in all this anchored me. He deserved stability, no matter what happened between me and his mother. Amanda and I barely spoke that day. The atmosphere in the house was thick with unspoken words, each of us tiptoeing around the other. Ryan, blissfully unaware, spent most of his time in the backyard playing basketball. Watching him through the kitchen window brought a lump to my throat. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that the family they've known is falling apart? I needed advice. Someone outside this mess to give me perspective. I called my older brother James. He lived 2 states over and had always been the level-headed one in the family. If anyone could help me navigate this chaos, it was him. Hey, Nate, James answered, his voice warm and familiar. What's up? Everything okay? The question hit harder than it should have. Not really, I admitted, my voice cracking. Talk to me, he said, his tone immediately shifting to concern. Over the next hour, I poured everything out, the late nights, the emails, the paternity test, even the confrontation with Amanda. James listened silently, occasionally offering a hum of understanding, but he didn't interrupt. When I finally finished, there was a long pause on the line. Man, he said finally, letting out a low whistle. That's a lot. I'm sorry, Nate. I can't imagine how you're feeling right now. Lost, I said simply. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to pack up and leave, but Ryan, you're not just thinking about yourself, James said, cutting in. And that's good. But you need to figure out what's best for you, too. Ryan's important, yeah, but you can't be a good dad to him if you're miserable. I swallowed hard, his words hitting a nerve. So what? Divorce? Therapy? Pretend none of this ever happened? Only you can decide that, he said gently. But pretending isn't going to work. Trust me. If you stay, it's got to be because you want to try, not because you feel like you have to. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I don't know if I can ever trust her again. That's fair, James said. But trust can be rebuilt. It's not easy, and it takes time, but it's possible. The question is, do you think Amanda's willing to put in the work? And are you? The rest of the conversation was filled with practical advice, talking to a lawyer, considering therapy, setting boundaries. By the time I hung up, I felt a little more grounded. The road ahead was still uncertain, but at least I had a starting point. Later that evening, after Ryan went to bed, I sat down with Amanda in the living room. Her eyes were puffy, like she'd been crying again, but she looked at me with a mix of hope and dread. We need to figure this out, I said, breaking the silence. She nodded quickly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, she said. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. I just want a chance to make this right. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. This isn't just about therapy, Amanda. It's about rebuilding something you destroyed. And I'm not sure if that's even possible. Her face crumpled, but she didn't interrupt. I'm going to talk to a lawyer, I said. Not because I've decided on divorce, but because I need to know what my options are. And we're going to start therapy, individually and together. But I need you to understand something. This isn't forgiveness. Not yet. This is just me trying to figure out if there's anything left to save. Amanda nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she whispered. "And I'll do whatever it takes, Nate. I mean that." I studied her for a moment, searching for any sign of insincerity, but all I saw was desperation. Whether it was for me, for Ryan, or for the life she'd risked losing, I couldn't tell. "I hope you do," I said finally. The next week was a blur of logistics and emotions. I scheduled an initial consultation with a family lawyer, mostly to understand my options. It was a strange, sobering experience sitting across from someone who discussed terms like custody agreements and asset division, as if it were just another day at the office. Walking out of that meeting, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. Meanwhile, Amanda and I started therapy. I insisted on individual sessions first. There was no way I could sit in the same room with her and be productive without some groundwork being laid. My first session was uncomfortable. The therapist, Dr. Harris, was a soft-spoken woman in her late 40s with a knack for asking the exact questions I wasn't ready to answer. "So, Nate," she began, pen poised over her notepad, "what's the primary goal you'd like to achieve through therapy?" I let out a dry laugh. "Honestly? I don't know. My wife cheated on me, lied to me, and I'm still here trying to figure out if I can get past it. I guess I just want clarity." Dr. Harris nodded, her expression calm and non-judgmental. "That's a good starting point. Let's break it down a bit. What do you feel right now sitting here?" "Angry," I said without hesitation. "Betrayed. Confused. Like nothing in my life makes sense anymore." She jotted something down. "And what about Amanda? Do you still love her?" The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to answer but stopped short. Did I still love her? It was hard to tell. The Amanda I married, the one who used to dance in the kitchen and laugh until her sides hurt, that Amanda I loved with all my heart. But the Amanda who lied to my face and snuck around with someone else? That version of her felt like a stranger. "I don't know," I said finally. "Sometimes I think I do, but other times, I can't even look at her without getting angry." "That's normal," Dr. Harris said. "Love and anger often coexist in situations like this. It's okay to feel both." The session continued, with Dr. Harris gently guiding me through my emotions and helping me identify what I wanted from therapy. By the end, I felt a little less lost, though no closer to a decision. Amanda had her own session the next day. She was quiet when she came home, retreating to the bedroom without saying much. Part of me wanted to ask how it went, but another part of me didn't want to know. A few days later, we had our first joint session. Sitting in the small, dimly lit room with Amanda beside me felt surreal. Dr. Harris started by setting some ground rules. No interruptions, no yelling, and no rehashing old arguments without purpose. "Nate," she began, turning to me, "what would you like Amanda to understand about how you're feeling right now?" I took a deep breath, glancing at Amanda before speaking. "I feel like I don't know who you are anymore," I said, my voice trembling. "I trusted you. I thought we were a team, and you went behind my back and destroyed everything we built. I don't know how to move forward from that." Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I know I hurt you," she said softly, "and I hate myself for it. I made a horrible mistake, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I want to make things right, Nate. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't ignore the skepticism gnawing at me. "You say that," I said, "but how do I know this won't happen again? How do I know you won't get lonely the next time life gets hard?" Amanda flinched at the harshness in my tone, but she nodded. "You're right to ask that," she said. "And I don't have a perfect answer. All I can do is prove to you, day by day, that I'm committed to us and to our family." The session continued with more back and forth, some moments more productive than others. Dr. Harris encouraged us to focus on communication and honesty. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever fully trust Amanda again. When we left the office, Amanda reached for my hand as we walked to the car. I hesitated for a moment but let her take it. Her touch felt familiar and foreign all at once, like it belonged to someone I used to know but couldn't quite recognize anymore. We didn't talk much on the drive home. The weight of everything we'd discussed lingered between us, heavy and suffocating. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the session in my head. It hadn't magically solved anything, but it was a start, a small, tentative step towards something that might one day resemble healing. The question was, did I have the strength to keep taking those steps? The next few weeks felt like walking a tightrope. Amanda and I were in this strange limbo, either fully together nor completely apart. Therapy became a constant in our lives, a routine that forced us to confront the mess we'd made of our marriage. Amanda threw herself into it. She started reading books on rebuilding trust, writing in a journal, and openly sharing her thoughts during our sessions. At home, she was different. She didn't just apologize, she showed up in ways she hadn't before. She'd help Ryan with his homework without me asking, cook dinner without complaining, and even left her phone face up on the counter as if to say, "I have nothing to hide." It was weird. Part of me appreciated the effort, but another part couldn't help but see it as damage control, a desperate attempt to undo what couldn't be undone. Trust wasn't something you could rebuild with a few kind gestures. It was earned over time, and right now, I didn't know if Amanda could ever earn it back. Ryan, of course, was oblivious to the undercurrent of tension between us. He was thriving at school, excited about an upcoming science fair project, and blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. I clung to his innocence like a lifeline. One Saturday, while Amanda was out running errands, Ryan and I decided to build a model volcano for his project. We spent hours in the garage, mixing plaster and carefully shaping the cone. He was beaming with pride when we added the finishing touches. "This is so cool, Dad," he said, his eyes wide with excitement. "Yeah, bud," I said, ruffling his hair. "You did a great job." In that moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, no matter what happened with Amanda, I could still give Ryan a good life. That night, after Ryan went to bed, Amanda and I sat down together in the living room. It wasn't planned, we just ended up there at the same time, the silence between us stretching on until she finally spoke. "I saw the volcano," she said, her voice soft. "It looks amazing." Ryan couldn't stop talking about it. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "He worked hard on it." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for being such a good dad." The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. She looked tired, yes, but there was a vulnerability in her expression that I hadn't seen in a long time. "Ryan deserves the best," I said simply. "So do you," she whispered. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she meant it, that this wasn't just another layer of manipulation or guilt. But the walls I built around myself were too strong, too fortified by months of betrayal and doubt. "I'm trying, Nate," she continued, her voice trembling. "I know I can't erase what I've done, but I want to be better. For you. For Ryan. For us." I let out a long breath, leaning back against the couch. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I admitted. "I don't even know if I want to try." Amanda nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I understand," she said. "But I'm not giving up. Even if it takes years, I'm going to prove to you that I'm worth trusting again." We sat there in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on both of us. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small, tentative crack in my armor. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about the early days of our relationship, the laughter, the late-night talks, the way we dreamed about building a life together. Somewhere along the way, we'd lost that spark. Maybe it was because of her, or maybe it was because of me. Either way, it was gone now, and I didn't know if we could ever get it back. But part of me, just a small part, wanted to try. The decision to try wasn't a light one. It felt more like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown, and convincing myself to take one cautious step forward. Amanda had shattered my trust, but the memories of who we once were and the hope that we could reclaim even a fraction of that kept me tethered. That week, we began to set boundaries, not just for each other, but for ourselves. It was Amanda's idea, one she brought up during our therapy session. "I know I have to earn back your trust," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "But I think we need clear expectations. Rules even. Something to guide us through this." It wasn't a bad idea, though it stung that our marriage had come to this, treating each other like business partners drafting a contract. Still, I agreed, and with Dr. Harris's help, we came up with a plan. For Amanda, it meant complete transparency. No more private passwords, no unexplained absences, and no contact with Mark or anyone who might blur the lines again. For me, it meant committing to the process, showing up for therapy, being honest about my feelings, and making a real effort to rebuild communication. It felt clinical, like dissecting a broken machine to see which parts could be salvaged, but it was a start. At home, Amanda continued to make an effort. She started planning family dinners, something we hadn't done consistently in years. One night, she even suggested we play board games after Ryan went to bed, something we used to do back when we were still us. I hesitated at first, unsure if I was ready for that level of normalcy. But when I saw the hopeful look in her eyes, I agreed. That night, we played a round of Scrabble at the dining room table. It was awkward at first, the silence between turns feeling more like a chasm than a pause. But then Amanda made a bad joke about my questionable vocabulary, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we laughed. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next few weeks were filled with these small moments of progress. A shared laugh here, a meaningful conversation there. It was like trying to piece together a shattered vase, knowing it would never be perfect but hoping it might still hold water. But for every step forward there were setbacks. One night, I came across an old photo album while cleaning out the closet. Flipping through the pages, I saw snapshots of our life before everything fell apart. Amanda and me on our honeymoon, grinning like fools, Ryan's first birthday party, where we both wore ridiculous party hats, a family trip to the beach, the three of us covered in sand and sunscreen. I stared at the photos, my chest tightening with a mix of nostalgia and grief. Those moments felt so far away now, like they belonged to someone else. When Amanda walked into the room and saw me holding the album, her face fell. "I miss those days too," she said softly, sitting down beside me. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I closed the album and set it aside, unable to look at the smiling faces frozen in time. "I don't know if we can ever get back to that," I said finally. Amanda reached for my hand, hesitating before her fingers brushed mine. "Maybe not," she said. "But maybe we can create something new. Different, but still good." Her words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Despite the progress we were making, the doubts lingered. Some nights, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was making a mistake. Was it really possible to rebuild a marriage after this kind of betrayal? Or were we just delaying the inevitable? One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, hoping to find something that would give me clarity. Instead, I stumbled across a picture of Ryan and me at his first Little League game. He was grinning from ear to ear, his baseball cap slightly askew, and I was kneeling beside him, my arm draped over his shoulders. I remembered that day vividly, how nervous he'd been, how proud I was when he hit his first ball, and how Amanda had cheered the loudest from the stands. Looking at that photo, I felt a pang of guilt. Ryan didn't deserve to grow up in a broken home. He didn't deserve to lose the family he'd always known because of mistakes he had no part in. For the first time, I realized that my decision wasn't just about me or Amanda. It was about Ryan too. And while I couldn't ignore my own feelings, I had to consider what was best for him. The next day, I brought up the idea of a trial separation. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I needed time to figure out if I could truly move past Amanda's betrayal. When I told her, she looked devastated. "Nate, please, she said, tears streaming down her face. I thought we were making progress. We are, I said gently. But I need space to think, Amanda. I need to know if this is something I can live with, or if it's better for both of us to move on. She nodded reluctantly, wiping her tears. If that's what you need, I'll support it, she said. But please don't give up on us completely. I'm still fighting for our family. Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. That night, as I packed a small bag and prepared to stay at my brother's house for a few weeks, I looked around at the home we built together. The pictures on the walls, the clutter on the counters, the faint smell of Amanda's perfume, it all felt so familiar and yet so distant. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. This wasn't the end, not yet. But it was a step toward finding clarity, whatever that might look like. My brother James welcomed me into his home with no questions asked. He had a spare room in the basement, quiet and private, and he didn't push me to talk unless I wanted to. That's the thing about James, he always knew when to listen and when to leave me alone. The first few nights in the new space were eerily quiet. Without Ryan's laughter or Amanda's presence in the house, I felt like a ship untethered from its dock. I'd thought the separation might give me a sense of peace, but instead, it left me with more time to overthink. James checked in on me one evening while we were sitting on the back porch, a couple of beers between us. "How's it going?" he asked, his tone casual but laced with concern. I sighed, staring out at the darkened yard. "It's hard," I admitted. "Part of me feels like this separation is the right thing, but another part of me keeps wondering if I'm just running away from the problem." James took a sip of his beer, nodding thoughtfully. "It's not running away if you're taking time to figure out what you want. You're not just making a decision for yourself, you're thinking about Ryan too. That's a lot of pressure, man." "Yeah," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I just don't want to screw this up. For him, for me, or even for Amanda." "She hurt you," James said bluntly. "You're allowed to put yourself first for once. If this marriage isn't salvageable, you're not doing anyone any favors by staying in it out of guilt." His words echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended. The days turned into weeks, and the separation gave me a new perspective on my relationship with Amanda. Without her there to navigate around, I was able to reflect on everything, both the good and the bad. I thought about the way she used to light up whenever Ryan brought home a good grade, or how she stayed up late helping him with a school project. Those moments reminded me of why I fell in love with her in the first place. But then I'd remember the lies, the nights she came home late, and the look in her eyes when I asked her if Ryan was mine. One afternoon, while sorting through some of the things I'd brought with me, I found an old notebook I hadn't seen in years. It was from when Amanda and I were first married, a place where we'd written down dreams, plans, and silly bucket list ideas. Flipping through the pages, I found a list we'd made. Buy a house with a big backyard. Take Ryan, back then just a hypothetical, future kid, to Disneyland. Learn how to cook one meal together without arguing. Never go to bed angry. I laughed bitterly at that last one. If only we'd kept that promise, maybe we wouldn't have ended up here. Amanda called every few days, mostly to check in on Ryan's schedule or update me on therapy. She'd started seeing a therapist twice a week, in addition to our joint sessions, and she made a point of telling me how committed she was to the process. "I'm not giving up, Nate," she said during one call. "Even if you decide this is over, I'm still going to work on myself. I have to." Her words sounded sincere, and while part of me wanted to believe her, another part remained skeptical. Trust wasn't rebuilt through words, it required action. And to her credit, Amanda was making an effort. She sent me pictures of the family dinners she and Ryan were having, kept me updated on his school projects, and even started writing me letters. Long, handwritten pages where she poured out her thoughts and apologies. At first, I didn't read them. I left them in a stack on my bedside table, unsure if I was ready to face whatever she'd written. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. The first letter was raw and emotional. Amanda wrote about how lonely she'd felt in the months leading up to the affair, how she'd convinced herself that I didn't care about her anymore. She didn't excuse her actions but tried to explain them, and while her words didn't erase the pain, they gave me a glimpse into her perspective. By the time I finished the letter, I wasn't sure how to feel. Was she genuinely remorseful? Or was this just another attempt to win me back? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. One weekend, I picked Ryan up for a day trip to the park. He was thrilled to spend time with me, and for a few hours, I managed to forget about everything else. Watching him climb the jungle gym and race around the field reminded me of how much I had to fight for, whether it was with or without Amanda. On the drive home, Ryan asked a question that caught me off guard. "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" I nearly swerved the car. "What do you mean, buddy?" He shrugged, fiddling with the zipper on his jacket. "You're not home as much anymore. And Mom's been really quiet lately. Is something wrong?" My heart sank. "Ryan, your mom and I are just working through some stuff," I said carefully. "But we both love you very much, and that's never going to change." "Okay," he said, his voice small. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the weight of his words settling over me. Whatever I decided, it wouldn't just affect me or Amanda. It would shape Ryan's world too. That night, as I dropped Ryan off at home, Amanda came to the door. She didn't say much, just offered me a small smile that looked more like an olive branch than anything else. "Thanks for taking him today," she said. "Of course," I replied. For a moment, we stood there in awkward silence. Then Amanda spoke again, her voice hesitant. "Have you thought about what's next?" I didn't answer right away. "I'm still figuring that out," I said finally. "But I'll let you know when I do." Amanda nodded, her expression a mix of hope and resignation. As I drove away, I felt the weight of the decision looming over me. No matter what I chose, the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Another week passed, and I still didn't have an answer. Every day felt like a tug-of-war between my head and my heart, between logic and emotion. Amanda's efforts to rebuild trust hadn't gone unnoticed, but the scars of her betrayal were still fresh, and I couldn't ignore the lingering doubts that gnawed at me. One evening, as I sat on the back porch of my brother's house, staring at the darkening sky, James joined me with 2 beers in hand. "You've been quiet lately," he said, handing me one of the bottles. "More than usual, I mean." I let out a dry laugh. "Just trying to make sense of everything." James leaned back in his chair, taking a long sip. "You're not going to find a perfect answer, you know. This isn't something you can solve with logic alone." "That's the problem," I said, running a hand through my hair. "Every time I think I've made up my mind, I second-guess myself. What if I stay, and I never trust her again? Or what if I leave, and Ryan ends up resenting me for breaking up the family?" "You're putting way too much on your shoulders," James said, shaking his head. "Ryan loves you, Nate. That's not going to change. But you can't stay in a marriage out of guilt. That's not fair to you, or to Amanda." I stared at the beer in my hand, James's words sinking in. He was right. As much as I wanted to protect Ryan, I couldn't sacrifice my own happiness to do it. The next day, I decided to take Ryan out for dinner, just the 2 of us. We went to his favorite burger place, where he ordered a milkshake the size of his head and talked excitedly about his upcoming science fair. At one point, he looked up at me, his face serious. "Are you ever coming back home, Dad?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "Why do you ask, buddy?" Ryan shrugged, stirring his milkshake with his straw. "It's just weird not having you there. Mom seems sad a lot, and I miss having you around." I swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "Things are a little complicated right now," I said carefully. "But no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. Okay?" Ryan nodded, but his eyes were filled with questions I couldn't answer. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the spare room at James's house. Ryan's words echoed in my mind, and I realized I couldn't keep dragging this out. Amanda and I needed closure, one way or another. The next morning, I called her and asked if we could talk. She agreed, her voice tentative but hopeful. We met at a nearby park, away from Ryan and the house. Amanda was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mix of hope and dread. "Thanks for meeting me," she said softly. I nodded, sitting down beside her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The weight of what we were about to discuss hung heavy in the air. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves clawing at my chest. "And I've come to a decision." Amanda's breath itched, but she didn't speak. "I can't go back to the way things were," I said. "Too much has happened, and I don't think I can ever trust you the way I used to." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Nate, please," she whispered. "I'll do anything." "I know," I interrupted gently. "And I see how hard you're trying. But it's not just about effort, Amanda. It's about what's already broken. I can't ignore that, no matter how much I want to." She sobbed quietly, her hands shaking as she wiped at her face. "What about Ryan?" she asked. "What are we going to tell him?" "We'll tell him the truth," I said. "That we still love him, and that this isn't his fault. We'll co-parent. We'll do everything we can to make this as easy on him as possible. But I can't stay in this marriage, Amanda. I can't." The words felt final, like slamming the door on a chapter of my life I'd never wanted to end. Amanda nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't like it, but I understand." We sat there for a long time, neither of us speaking, as the enormity of the moment settled over us. That evening, I told Ryan I'd be moving into my own place. He took the news better than I expected, though his eyes brimmed with tears as he asked, "Does this mean you and Mom don't love each other anymore?" I knelt down in front of him, holding his small hands in mine. "We still care about each other," I said. "But sometimes, grown-ups have to make hard choices. This doesn't mean we don't love you, okay? That will never change." Ryan nodded, though the sadness in his eyes was almost too much to bear. As I packed my things that night, Amanda watched from the doorway, silent tears streaming down her face. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. There was nothing left to say. The first night in my new apartment felt surreal. The place was small and sparsely furnished, just a couch, a bed, and a coffee table, but it was mine. As I sat on the couch, surrounded by unpacked boxes, the silence felt different. Not suffocating like it had been in the weeks before the separation, but still heavy with uncertainty. I stared at my phone, debating whether to call Ryan. I knew he was home with Amanda, likely trying to process the changes, and I didn't want to overwhelm him. But I missed him already. Instead, I sent a quick text. "Hey, buddy. Hope you had a good day. Love you." His reply came almost instantly. "Miss you, Dad. Love you too." The knot in my chest loosened slightly. If nothing else, I was determined to keep that connection strong. The next few weeks were an adjustment. Amanda and I worked out a custody schedule, splitting time with Ryan as evenly as possible. It was awkward at first, the handoffs filled with tension and unspoken words. But we managed, both of us determined to keep things civil for Ryan's sake. One Friday evening, I picked Ryan up for our weekend together. He was carrying a duffel bag almost as big as he was, and his face lit up when he saw me. "Hey, kiddo," I said, ruffling his hair as he climbed into the car. "Hey, Dad. Can we get pizza tonight?" "Of course," I said, smiling. "Whatever you want." Later that night, as we sat in the living room eating pizza and watching a movie, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. Ryan was laughing, crumbs on his face, completely immersed in the cartoon on the screen. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something right. Amanda, meanwhile, continued her therapy sessions and sent occasional updates. She never pushed, never begged me to reconsider, but I could tell she was struggling. One evening I received a text from her. "I know this is hard for you too. I just want you to know I'm grateful for everything you're doing for Ryan. He's lucky to have you. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. He's lucky to have both of us. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement that she was trying, and that effort mattered, not for me, but for Ryan. The hardest part of the separation was navigating the moments when Ryan asked questions I couldn't answer. Are you and Mom going to be friends again? He asked one afternoon while we were at the park. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. We're always going to be on the same team when it comes to you, I said. Sometimes things change between grown-ups, but that doesn't mean we stop caring about each other. Ryan nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. I just want everyone to be happy. I smiled, ruffling his hair. Me too, buddy. Me too. As the weeks turned into months, I began to settle into my new routine. I found solace in the small things, taking Ryan to the park, cooking dinner together, even just sitting on the couch and talking about his day. My relationship with him grew stronger in ways I hadn't expected, and for that, I was grateful. Amanda and I started communicating more openly, mostly about Ryan but occasionally about ourselves. She shared updates on her therapy, her work, and the ways she was trying to grow as a person. I listened, offering polite responses but keeping my emotional distance. One day, she asked if we could have coffee to talk about where we stood. I'm not asking for anything, she said over the phone. I just think it would be good for us to have some closure. I agreed, though I wasn't sure what I was hoping to gain from the conversation. We met at a small cafe near the park, a neutral place where the weight of our history felt less overwhelming. Amanda looked nervous as she sipped her coffee, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. Thanks for coming, she said. I nodded. What's on your mind? She took a deep breath, her gaze meeting mine. I wanted to thank you, she said, for giving me space to work on myself, for staying civil. I know I don't deserve it, but it means a lot. I didn't say anything, unsure how to respond. I also wanted to say I'm sorry again. She continued, not just for what I did, but for the way I hurt you. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to be better. For myself. For Ryan. Her words were genuine, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of understanding. Amanda had made terrible choices, but she was trying to take accountability for them. I appreciate that, I said finally. And I believe you're trying. But this is still hard for me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to move past it completely. I understand, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I just want you to know that I'll always respect whatever boundaries you need. We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the cafe filling the space between us. This isn't the life I imagined for us, I said quietly. Me neither, she replied. But despite the sadness in her voice, there was a sense of acceptance, too. As I left the cafe that day, I felt a strange sense of peace. Amanda and I were no longer the people we once were, but maybe that was okay. Maybe we didn't need to be. This wasn't the ending I'd wanted, but it was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, not as a couple, but as two people committed to doing what was best for our son. 6 months had passed since I moved out, and while life wasn't perfect, it felt like I was finally standing on solid ground. Ryan had adjusted well to the new arrangement, splitting his time between Amanda's house and mine. He seemed happier now, more at ease, and I could tell he appreciated the effort Amanda and I made to keep things amicable. Amanda and I weren't friends, not exactly, but we'd found a rhythm that worked. We kept our conversation short and focused on Ryan, avoiding rehashing the past. There were moments of awkwardness, sure, but there was also a quiet understanding between us. We both wanted what was best for Ryan, and that common goal was enough to keep things civil. One day, after dropping Ryan off at school, I found myself driving past the park where Amanda and I had met to discuss our separation months ago. On a whim, I parked the car and walked to the bench where we'd sat that day. The memory of that conversation felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. I'd been so lost back then, so unsure of what the future held. But now, standing there in the crisp morning air, I realized how far I'd come. Amanda's betrayal had broken me in ways I didn't think I could recover from. It had shattered my trust, my sense of stability, and the life I thought I'd built. But it had also forced me to grow, to take a hard look at myself and what I wanted from life. I wasn't the same person I'd been a year ago. I was stronger now, more resilient. And while the scars of what had happened would always be a part of me, they no longer defined me. A few weeks later, Ryan and I were sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, when he turned to me with a question that caught me off guard. "Are you happy, Dad?" I blinked, surprised by the suddenness of it. "What do you mean, bud?" He shrugged, his eyes serious. "You smile more now. And you laugh a lot. It's just different." I thought about his question for a moment before answering. "Yeah, I think I am," I said honestly. "It's been a tough year, but I'm starting to feel better. Stronger." Ryan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Good. I like this version of you." His words hit me harder than I expected. I pulled him into a hug, grateful beyond words for the bond we shared. That night, after Ryan fell asleep, I sat down with my guitar, a new addition to my life, and strummed a few chords. The music wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. It was a reminder that healing was a process, a series of small, imperfect steps that eventually added up to something meaningful. As I played, I thought about everything I'd learned over the past year. Life doesn't always go the way you plan. People aren't perfect. And sometimes the things that hurt the most are the things that help you grow. Amanda's betrayal had been a painful chapter in my life, but it wasn't the end of my story. It was just one part of a larger journey, one that I was still writing every day. And as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the music filling the room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Reflection. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that healing isn't linear. There are good days and bad days, moments of clarity and moments of doubt. But no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way forward. For anyone going through something similar, my advice is this: take your time. Don't rush your decisions or let guilt drive your choices. Focus on what matters most: your happiness, your kids, your future, and trust that with time, things will get better. Because they will. You'll heal. You'll grow. And one day, you'll look back on this chapter and realize it didn't break you. It made you stronger.